My father had a master's degree, but in the South, he didn't have protected voting rights. So when we talk about this history of voting rights, I'm born in '63, that means in my lifetime, this is not some ancient history. It's only been in my lifetime that we've had the protections of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So what I say to people when you talk about voting rights and why people get so upset when people now today try to come up with 21st century versions of voter suppression and 21st century versions of Jim Crow and poll taxing, and they act as though, what's wrong, why are you all complaining? They are ahistorical. After the Civil War, something phenomenal happened called fusion politics, unique to the South. Lincoln Republicans joined with former slaves or freedmen to rewrite constitutions all over the South. Right here in North Carolina, 1868, they rewrote the Constitution. The promises of Reconstruction was that we're going to reconstruct the nation to be more close to its noble ideas, what it said on paper, not what it did in practice. By 1870, in North Carolina, you had more African Americans serving in the General Assembly than you have today. Those legislators joined with progressive whites, wrote some of the most progressive education laws, labor laws, voting laws, criminal justice laws. I'm talking 144 years ago. By 1872, however, there was a violent reaction by the former planters, and they called it the redemption movement. They needed to redeem America, and particularly the South, from the influence of black political power. They needed to stop fusion politics. Klan was formed in 1872 as a political organization. And by 1898, November 10th, 1898, there was a vicious, violent riot called the Wilmington Riots. Duly elected blacks and whites were run out of office. White supremacists took over the state legislature. And the first thing they attacked, there were always 5 things they attacked. They attacked educational laws, they attacked labor laws, they attacked fair criminal justice laws, they attacked taxes. They wanted to cut taxes so that the government wouldn't have any money to fulfill the promises that had been made to the former slaves. And they attacked voting rights. If your grandfather was a slave, then you couldn't vote. Or poll taxes, you have to pay something in order to be able to exercise your right to vote. White supremacy is rewritten into the laws of the state. And by 1910, black voting power is virtually nothing, 0. So the Reconstruction movement was ended by the late 1800s. Then you get the 1960s, that's the second Reconstruction. Dr. King, March on Washington, 50 years ago, a man in whose shadow we stand, talked about the emancipation, but he also said that things were not yet where they should be. From 54, Brown versus Board of Education, all the way to the death of Dr. King, you have this massive movement, blacks and whites, Jews and Gentiles, all coming together, reconstructing the nation. How was that stopped? They attacked voting rights, they attacked education, they attacked progressive tax policy, but they also attacked leaders. Killed Martin, Medgar, Malcolm, Kennedy, Robert and John, hundreds of others, and that shut down the second Reconstruction. Then you have something strange happen. You have a guy named Barack Obama to run for the presidency in 2008. And guess what he does? He runs a campaign rooted in the idea of fusion politics, like you had in the 1800s, like you saw in the 1960s. And guess what? He wins in places like North Carolina, in the South. And how does he win? The electorate is broad and it's deep and it's young and it's old and it's LGBT and it's black and it's Hispanic and it's Asian and it's people who want to push America beyond the vestiges of racism. And so his election represents the possibility of a third Reconstruction. And it just might work this time. It just might work. The demographics are changing. More black and brown people. Younger folk are not as bound as they once were. But that new electorate scares the whatever out of those who have a homogeneous view of life. It does not fit their worldview. So what do you see? An all-out assault once again. This attack on voting rights starts immediately after President Obama is elected. Since 1776, when North Carolina was a state, we have never had voter ID. We've had something called signature attestation. You sign your name, and if you lie, you get a 5-year felony. That's sufficient. In order for somebody to actually lie on election day, this is what they would have to do. They'd have to get up in the morning, they'd have to go to a polling place where most people know the people who come to vote, and hope that nobody is sitting their nose down. Then they would have to pray that the person they're going to impersonate has not already shown up, because their signature will be on the books. Then they have to sign their name right, correctly, vote, leave, and pray to God that the person doesn't show up. And then in order to have any effect, they'd have to get about 10,000 people to do that and be quiet and not tell anybody. It's ludicrous what they're really suggesting. 1870. The Constitution was amended with the 15th Amendment. No state can deny or abridge the right to vote. Jim Crow was straight out trying to deny. These new tactics, which some call Jim Crow, some call it James Crow Esquire, are attempts to abridge, to put impediments in the way of people participating in the fullness of this democracy. That is unconstitutional. Jim Crow would just blatantly say, you can't vote. Jim Crow said, read the Constitution backward. Jim Crow says, how many bubbles in a bar of soap? Jim Crow says, was your grandfather a slave? James Crow Esquire comes along in a suit, gets a computer, goes in the back room, and very slyly uses a computer module and uses the geographic information on race to divide and undermine not only black power, but the power of fusion politics. That's why on February the 9th, we're having a massive people's coalition. We do it every year. Thousands of people are going to the legislature. We're focusing on the poor, but we're saying that if you're going to address poverty and economic justice, you've got to have fair and equitable voting rights, because that's the only place of balance. Poor people can't compete with the rich lobbyists. So they have to have access to the ballot in order to shape the balance of power.